You all ready?
We are ready.
Good morning and thanks for coming. Last time we met, we discussed that we would have a presentation and we wanted to go over how public information requests would work when it came to the G-file in line with our proposal to remove the confidentiality of G-file, basically for the city to no longer maintain a G-file in accordance with Prop A. But before we get started, again, as we told you, we would be requesting if y'all would reconsider sharing proposals on the screen for public consumption and transparency. So we wanted to just touch base with you on that one
Well, the answer is no, but basically, as we explained before, even though 143-300, we argue about whether we're in it or out of it. I think we're in it, but 143-300 doesn't require a public meeting, and we said, okay, fine, let's have a meeting. 143-300 doesn't allow release of work product until after ratification. 142 says prior to ratification, and we're okay with that. We're not arguing about those two things. But we're not prepared at this time to release work product going back and forth. So just comply with the statute.
All right, understood.
All right.
Do you all have any objection for us making our presentations public on the screen?
No, it's educational. It's not a work product. It's public education, and we need the same information. Thank you.
All right, so let me go ahead and introduce who we have here who will be making the presentations. We have Cindy Trevino. She's an attorney partner in my office at Navarro, Rocha, Bernal, and Zek. And Neil Fabu, who's the division chief of open government. And we'll start off with Cindy, who's going to generally explain how public information works in our non-143 cities. So our cities that do not have a G-file. And then Neil will explain how things work in the city of Boston. So I will leave it to you, Cindy.
See if I can do the share here. It always takes a minute, don't worry, it's not you. And if you need help, maybe let's can help this one. Well, it would appear to be me, so. So you know there's always a lag.
There is.
There's a lag. We'll sit down. Well, we might not share a presentation.
What are the sheets that we use for overhead projector? You just have a plastic sheet.
Yeah.
Lay it on the top. I have one in my car.
Well, I think we are now playing with power. But good morning. Thank you so much for hearing me out. Today, this presentation or this portion of it is regarding G-files in particularly related to TPIAs, the request for public information as it relates to personnel files. So not every law enforcement agency is civil service under Section 43 of the Texas Local Government Code. The G-file is unique to those civil service cities. There is no equivalent of a G-file provision for other types of law enforcement agencies. So you are either civil service or you are not. Other municipalities, both large and small, that are not civil services do not have an actual G file. And those personnel files are considered public information subject to the rules and regulations provided for in the Texas Public Information Act and other state and federal law that might be applicable to the information within those files. So what is generally applicable? We're going to get some tech help here. Okay, perfect. So what is generally applicable to law enforcement files, and this is only pertains to those peace officers as the code defines. And under Texas Government Code, sections 552.117A, .1175, and 1175B, that automatically makes certain peace officer information confidential by law. So that includes home address, home phone numbers, emergency contact information, a social security number, date of birth, information about family members, and driver's license, although the driver's license provisions are covered by the section mentioned here, 552. So within law enforcement files, there are some records that are common to all enforcement personnel files and that are considered confidential by common law or by statutes outside of the Public Information Act. And so some records that are common to all types of personnel files are going to be, applications, background information, employment type of documents, W-2s, W-4s, I-9s, information that has direct deposit enrollment type information, medical information, health insurance, retirement pension, again, driver's license, fingerprints, particular for law enforcement officers, the L2, which is that declaration of medical condition, and the L3, which is that the psychological and mental health declaration form required by the Texas Commission of Law Enforcement. And credit reports, if the department ran credit reports as a part of the background check or processing for applicant processing. So there are records that have already been deemed confidential by the Attorney General, and no ruling is required in order to redact that information. And the listing is there, which is, again, the W-2s, W-4s, I-9 information, direct deposit, driver's license, fingerprints, L-2s, L-3s, insurance policy number information, and military discharge information. And then within those personnel files, there can be records that are controlled by other law, which do require submission to the Attorney General to withhold. And that's going to be information that is considered medical records, health insurance enrollment types of forms, retirement and pension benefits, again, credit reports, information that may be contained within a copy of a divorce decree or of some other civil matter that might be in the form of a court order. So with non-G files, complaints and investigations are handled a little bit differently than they are if you are an actual G file type of city. So non-G file complaints and investigations, they are actually reviewed for exceptions that may be applicable under the Public Information Act. And completed investigations for non-G file investigations are considered public information, but are reviewed for exceptions that may be applicable under the Public Information Act. And the actual practical aspects of processing a records request for a law enforcement personnel file between G file and non-G file cities is the processing time and, of course, the associated cost with processing. The primary difference being that each sheet of paper that may be responsive to a request must be reviewed for all the mandatory things, the things that the AG says has to be redacted, the things that state laws say have to be redacted, and then those things that must be submitted to the Attorney General. So those things that were listed as medical, health insurance type of information, those things that have to go to the AG must go to the AG for that authority to withhold the documentation. So those are the actual practical differences for those processing the open records. And then while this next piece of information is not necessarily G-file information, but it does sometimes come up as it relates to law enforcement personnel. On occasion, law enforcement personnel may actually be a suspect or a offender or somebody named in a police report. And when that happens, the rule regarding police information and law enforcement information applies to those records. And the AG has deemed this, quote, basic information. That is information that can be released outside of within a case report, while other information may have to be submitted to the Attorney General to request a withholding of certain information. And the information that is generally considered basic would be the name, age, certain information there, identification numbers, physical condition of the arrested person, the date, time of the arrest, the place of the arrest, the offense charged, the court which it's filed, any details of the arrest, booking information, and the laundry list of information within there. So basically the who, what, when, where, and why of a case report is generally considered basic information, and that can be released. Any other detailed information regarding the investigation of a case may potentially qualify to be withheld for a certain period of time, but it must be submitted to the AG for a ruling and a decision from the Attorney General as to what may be released. So that is processing of personnel records, in particular law enforcement personnel records. That's the 10,000-foot overview of what that process looks like for entities that are non-G-file entities.
Any questions on Cindy's?
We get a copy of that.
I was just gonna say, let Roxy know if you need help. Permission to share. It doesn't have permission to share.
this without the presentation. Hand it out after.
What we can do is email it to me to send and share it commercially. So, it's C6.
Sorry about this, Dawn.
Forget it.
I'm saying that if people say no IT. So IT said, I think
We are the most technologically.
city. You are. If they'd come today, we'd be wrong. I'm sorry.
Sometimes that's why I keep my calendar with pen and paper though, because I know that won't fail me.
Old school, right?
Do it with that.
Yeah, I can just. Sorry. I'm Neil Falgood. I'm the division chief for the open government division of the law department for the city. Also seeing you around negotiations, so it's actually letting me talk this. Anyway, I just want to walk you all through a little bit about how we process public information requests at the city and how that might change if there is no change. So, for purposes of our experiment today, I wanted to present a sort of representative example of the type of public information requests that we received. So they read something like this: please provide me with the personnel file for Officer Jane Doe since she began as a police officer with APC. So when we get that request, it comes into our processing system, and our staff then divide that request to different parts to go to different departments for them to retrieve information and send back to us. So in the case of this request for a police officer's quote personnel file, we would break that into 3 separate requests. And one would go to the Austin Police Department, as they would have internal personnel records. We would also send that request to the Human Resource Division because that's where the civil service file is kept, what we refer to as the public name file. And we would also send it to the Office of Police Oversight because they would have any records related to external complaints that they receive that are later investigated by. So for purposes of how we have been operating under the previous contract and under 3, the APB internal personnel file and the records that are held by OPO of external complaints that are investigated by internal affairs, both those would be considered G file. The civil service office file would be considered a public file, but we would still review that information because we want to make sure that there's no privacy information in it. Or I've even seen a couple times where a commendation that is in the public personnel file relates to a ongoing criminal investigation and reveals an officer's, let's say, undercover status. And so we would want to withhold that undercover status. We would withhold that information, even though it's still in public. So let's talk a little bit about the types of information that would be in each of those departments. So in APD's confidential internal affairs or internal personnel records file, we would have recruiting records, applications, and hiring records. Also have training records from the academy, worker compensation records, and then what's commonly referred to as the 201 file, which has all like W4, W2, payroll information, the typical kind of personnel file stuff that you can see. It also would consist of the internal affairs investigations and disciplinary records that did not result in termination, promotion, or suspension. So those are the 3 formal disciplines under chapter 1. In the civil service file that is held by HRD, that would contain commendations, awards, and honors, any disciplinary records related to discipline that resulted in termination, demotion, or suspension, and then periodic evaluation by the officers.
How would I share
And then for the Office of Police Oversight records, any external complaints that OPO receives that are later investigated by internal affairs. Any recommendations to the chief that identify officers who were not subject to formal discipline, records that are maintained. So once we have all that stuff gathered up from each of the departments, we have to figure out whether we're going to release it or write to the AG to withhold it, or just withhold it outright under one of those statutory authorizations, previous determinations. So for APD confidential G file, we would write to the AG on that information and assert section 143.089G. In that situation, there's no need for us to assert other exceptions because that exception is so broad that it's dispositive of everything else. So any other confidential information like medical information or personal information about their home address or phone number, all of that would be withheld under that one exception, so we don't raise anything else. Same goes for the OPO G file information. That would be included in letters to the Attorney General, and there's no need to insert exception. If there is no G file, then the process in terms of receiving the request and sending it out to the different departments will not change. What would change is the level of review that we give to all of those records when they come back to us. So we would have to, instead of just asserting that 143.089G, we would have to go through with a fine-tooth comb to look if there's any other confidential information in there, like that's the information. So medical records, medical information that might not be contained in a medical record, is still considered private. Any of that home address, home telephone number, family member information, social security number, all of that needs to be identified. L2s, L3s, any polygraph examination. Those are sort of the most common things that we see in response. If we have an internal affairs investigation that is related to an ongoing SIU investigation or the district attorney investigation, then we would write to the AG to withhold that information under the 552.1 exception. And that is information that relates to criminal investigation. And I make a distinction between administrative investigations because that 552.108 provision does not apply to a typical administrative investigation like an internal affairs investigation. It would only apply if that investigation is also part of a criminal investigation. As we know, the vast majority of internal affairs investigations are administrative in nature and don't really relate to a proceeding or possible criminal proceeding. So the vast majority of those internal affairs investigations would be the big investigations like officer shootings or the use of fluids. Under investigation either by SIU or Attorney Office. So that's usually what I have talked about.
Yeah, so if y'all have any questions, in addition to Cindy and Neil, we also have Robin Katz, who's with our law department, and she does the current police PIR requests, and that is her full-time job. It's just the police department, so.
Tell me today, I understand now, appreciate the information. What comes in today? And then what is normal, process time? Because people have to find it, they're just a big old G on the door, it's there, realize that you're recruiting from affairs, some sergeant, so somebody has to go out and look around for these things. Then HR, I got a little simpler that they have a file. And then whatever the OPO has. Anyway, so what's the normal time? I was asked Tyler's file last years. Say, I need 15 years worth of records. What do you think it would take? You just guess.
Take for you to receive a response. Yeah. So we would endeavor to write to the Attorney General's office within 10 business days of our receipt of the request. I'd say we're pretty successful on that end, 90 to 95% of the time. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and because 143.089G cannot be waived, we can still assert that after the deadline to write to the Attorney General's office. But 10 business days is our deadline to write, is our typical deadline to write to the Attorney General.
Are you telling me that within 10 days, you can find all of these records and have perused them and looked at them? But can you?
Well, so remember for 143.089G, that's going to be dispositive of anything else. So the amount of time that we invest in reviewing all of that is cut way down, because all we need to know from like APD is, yes, this is a record that's part of the internal personnel file. And in case of an officer who's been there for 20, 25 years, we don't need and would never send to the AG that entire file, because the AG would basically tell us, do not send us that much information. We want a representative sample of that file. So we would pull together a representative sample of the file to send to the AG.
Still, maybe I just want the records scattered all over the place. You get it. It's not the only piece of question you get in a day, I assume, because people want all kinds of information, not just the thousands of. Sure. That comes in. Can you gather? So are you just saying somebody asked for this, but you haven't even gone through it yet to determine what would be a G file or might be. I get that you're just saying, I don't have to review all this other files, I'm using G to say it's not there. But still has to be gathered, and the person sending it in is gonna get all of that file information in 10 days? Who's gonna copy it? You electronic?
Well, we have systems set up so that we're not making paper copies.
Sure.
And we have, a lot of staff that work on public information, it's not just the two of us. So we have systems in place to be able to move that along.
Well, what is this? We hear you're 21,000. That number not made publicly, but saying you're 21,000 records behind, releasing it to the public.
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
But it's not one, it's somewhere between 1 and 21,000.
I don't know the exact number.
Go back to this question. If there were no G file, now you don't get a pass, just G, we're done, G, we're done. You've got to look through all of those logs, records, and look in the file to see if that material's in there. You cannot, so 10 days, no one's getting that. You couldn't even read those files in 10 days. So how are you going to be, AG says you gotta release it or send it to us. I get that part. So now you've got 5 or 6 slides of material looking to see, oh, is that over in 552 or is that over in this record? That material now might be improper to release under other laws.
So that is what other cities, large cities like Dallas are currently doing.
Yeah.
So they have processes set up to do that. We don't have any processes in place at this time to do that, but there is a way to do that because other large cities are capable of doing that. And Cindy does it for small cities all across Texas, but for larger cities like this, it does happen. For state, for DPS, they don't have a G file, and all of those exceptions apply to them as well. So it is done in larger entities across the state.
And there are certain exceptions when it's highly voluminous, where there's cost, it's very cost effective, cost prohibitive,
They are scam.
there are certain exceptions that come into play if a city needs more than the 10 business days. So it's not just 10 days, it's 10 business days, and then there are 5 business days to write a brief. So it's not just 10 days, and then there are things that the city can utilize in the Open Records Act to either get more time and things like that for those instances where there's
Okay.
20 years of.
How long after I send you a letter saying I'd like to see Tyler's 15 years of files, if there were no G file, how long would it be before that request would eventually be sent to me?
We don't know. We don't have that process set up.
Well, you have it for other records, other persons. So if I ask about yours, you're not in G, I want your personnel file. How long would it take for me to get it?
Well,
You still got to vet it for all the other laws, because they're protected by.
yeah, but let's say they were requesting my person.
Okay,
Right.
not that I will.
It's very interesting.
No, I'm just about to.
You're getting great value.
Yeah.
So that would, that request would be assigned directly to the law department, which is where my personnel file resides. And we don't receive that many requests. We receive requests for personnel files, but it's on a smaller scale, so it's more manageable. And so that's how it would work in the rest of the city. We go to the individual department where the file resides. If we were to receive a request, assuming no G file, we were to receive a request for officers, a 25-year officer's person. I think the first thing we would do is communicate with the requester, which is very important, to communicate with the requesters to see what is it from the personnel file? Do you want the entire personnel file that's 25 years, or is there something specific that you're looking for? So we would work with the requester to identify if there's a way to narrow or specify. If they really truly want an entire 25-year personnel file, then we would say, okay, that's going to take time to process, and it's also going to cost us expenses to process, and we're going to determine whether we need to charge you for the time and resources it would take for us to process that. And so I can't say how every single request would be handled, because we engage with requesters in narrowing and setting scopes and setting.
Well, and to be clear, the open records statute itself provides for the narrowing and provides for the cost estimate to the requester. This isn't something that they're doing to be cute, that's actually within the statute.
You can't ask
So
the motive.
Yeah.
You can't ask the motive. I made a lot of public record requests. They can't ask your motive, but you could ask for clarity. I get all of that. I'm just trying to understand. How long from the day someone asks, somebody's got to find it, gather it, read it, cross-check against 8 or 10 or 20 categories of things. When you got all those things, medical record, if you have no G file, you're gonna get all of that. Then you're gonna have to tell them this is gonna cost you, somebody's gotta scan it. Someone's gotta make sure they're not sending out material that would be confidential and not law. Roughly, how long does that take?
if it was
6
for
months,
minor
maybe a
nails
year?
file, it would be within the 10 days.
In 10 days.
Yeah, absolutely. We
And
do
you're
that.
comfortable that they vetted it.
I'm not
before they-
saying, I'm not saying that could happen for the police department, but for other departments, that's easily done. I mean, having done that for a living myself, I can tell you that's easily done, because you don't have to look up the statute, you know the statute. So, and there are people within the law department who then review it to make sure that you did it right. So, I mean, they do that.
So presently, there's no notice to the officer, although 143, I'm not looking exact, I got it here, but there is some notice requirements about putting things in people's personnel files. So when the city gets this request, they're gonna be sending 25, 15 years worth of Tyler's record. Does anybody notify the employee that still is wanting their file? So the employee has a chance to look at it and determine if that material is confidential under this law. Maybe somebody missed it. We're human beings looking at all this stuff. It's not running through a computer. They get no notice, and the city could release stuff that could be G or confidential under other laws by accident. I mean, a lot of materials flying out.
We certainly would not take the position that accidents can't happen. And
Well, I
yes,
wouldn't admit
accidents-
liability here on TV either, but go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So who, you said the law office gets the request, who reviews the request?
We have a team within the law department, we call them the peer team, who receive every request that comes into the city. So like roughly 15,000 requests a year.
But just, I don't care about the rest of the city, but APD in particular, that's what we're here for. So who gets APD's requests, use those requests?
So are you asking currently or
Currently.
in the future if it were to be different?
Currently. I may get to the future here in a second.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's.
Currently.
So what you're asking is when the request comes in and we split it into all those departments.
Well,
we
I'm sorry, they said your name and I.
Robin,
Robin Chastain. You said she handles APD requests.
she is with the law department. I will let Neil or Robin explain exactly.
So,
Yeah.
Okay.
So the request comes in, we split it up into 3 component parts and we send it over to, we send a third of it basically over to APD for their records. And it goes over to somebody at APD who is Robin's client, and then I will hand it on.
My understanding that when somebody makes a request for personnel records at this moment, the person online selects whether they want it to go to city or APD side. Typically, they choose correctly the APD side, so it initially comes to us typically. And then what we'll do is we'll review it, and that's myself, that's central records, and that's PIO. And so it depends on who the requester is as to which team initially evaluates this request. So media would go to PIO. Central records would take and the rest of the general public. PIO also handles universities and students, student population as well. And then what they'll do is the PIO team or the central records team will let I have one paralegal and it's myself doing the APD requests. So they will let us know that a request came in for personnel records, and my paralegal and I kind of handle it on our own. So the first thing that I do is I'll reach out to somebody at APD who handles the IA investigations in IA, and I'll take a look at the complete IA history. So that's my first step. I want to determine whether there has been any sustained formal discipline, and that would be public information. But the remaining information in that IA file would be confidential under 143.089G. So that's sort of the first step I take. Second step is I reach out to folks over at HRD for APD and get that 201 file. And that's a representative sample of the personnel file within the 201 file. And then I'll reach out to training and get a copy of the training records. At the same time, we will create a city side peer number. So civil service on the city side of things, which is Neil's umbrella, they will work on the civil service file and getting that information all together. So once I receive the IA history and I determine what we're going to need to ask for representative samples to withhold, I'll get to IA, ask for a representative sample of information for those IA case numbers, if there are any, where there has not been sustained formal discipline. I'll get that together with 201 representative sample and training record, and we'll package it up, and we will send the Attorney General under the 143.089G argument. And yeah, we get the APD side gets double the number of city side requests. I mean, I think that came out, and it's a public document, so that came out within last year. We do get a lot, but we do need a system with my paralegal and myself reviewing them, because we have that sort of umbrella go-to G-file letter pretty much prepared and ready to send out. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. So you said you guys send a representative sample, what word you guys use? So representative, who determines what is representative of all that material that goes to the AG?
I do.
So and I'm not saying you, but like your position.
Right. So as the attorney who works with APD and public information requests for APD, I reach out to my single points of contact within the different divisions, and I ask them for a representative sample. And they'll send me a few pages, maybe different sections of, let's say, the recruiting file, because I also reach out to recruiting, by the way, that file.
So you're saying, sorry, somebody at recruiting picks items from the file, someone at HR, someone at
Correct.
training, they're picking, do we know, do these positions get training on what they should be looking to make sure they're encompassing the correct representative portion of the file?
Yeah, so we give them directives on what to provide us with. So, the typical recruiting file has different sections, like, A through G or A through M. And I'll ask for the first 10 pages of, A, B, T. So I'm aware of what's typically in those recruiting files and what sections would be a good representative sample to send to the Attorney General. And if I think that more information is needed, I'll reach back out. We have a really,
I understand you guys work really well together. arguing that. So the directive is just like memos that are going out to people, or they actually went through a class, open records requests. You guys be looking for, you guys just send out a memo saying these are the things. You should, or just your email with that request that comes in and says, hey, they want Tyler's file, can you send me
Yes,
1, 2, 3, 4 these things?
the latter, yes. So I'll send an email to my contact, and fortunately, the contacts that I reach out to have been there for a really long time. And so, as they've gotten other people within their departments, they've been able to train them. But my emails are, I would like, a copy of the complaint, the memo, the results of the investigation, and so on. And the recruiting file, I'd like a copy of the first 10 pages of section A, the credit report, and so on. Recruiting, a lot of those files are paper. And so it takes them some time to scan everything in and then get it to us. Sometimes we'll get it on because it's such a large file. We'll get it on.
So I know you said that, so the online, when someone fills out the request, they can check a box like city, which I guess would be your team, or APD, which go to your team. If they send it to your team, what happens with that?
So they review everything that comes, let's say a customer says, puts the little city box and not the APD box. We'll review it, and if we think that there's even a whiff of possible APD records that might exist responsive to that request, we will, we'll send it their way. We have systems in place to send it to APD and get that information delivered.
Just a couple more questions, sorry.
Please don't be sorry. We are literally here for this reason. We want you to have your questions answered, even if you don't like the answer.
Oh, yeah.
We want to try
Oh,
to
trust me, I'll
figure
ask.
this out, so.
I got no problems. So I know we said that Dallas, some other big cities that fall under this, that they have plans, but right now, the city does not have a plan on how our process is gonna change. Is that what I kind of heard?
Correct.
Okay. The question is, what the city's requesting via Prop A is for this new process to get rid of G-file and now open up things that were once protected, or that stamp of 143.089G is no longer available. And as you say, we get double the number of requests as a city of our one entity, and where that's open, I'm sure that request number will probably grow even more. So what is the city's plan on figuring out what this new process is gonna be?
Yeah, so unless and until we have it agreed to in a confer agreement, our belief is that it won't happen. So we are not hiring people at this juncture to do so. We do not have and have not created a plan and will not create a full formal plan unless and until we have an agreement with the association, or at least looking like we're getting there. So that's something we absolutely just can't answer. Will it take more time to review the files? Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like you heard in Cindy's presentation, there are other sections instead of just the G file. And I mean, we are cognizant of that. We're aware of that. It's going to take a lot more man hours to do it. Does that mean hiring more attorneys or more paralegals or more people to go through it? We do not have that plan. Absolutely don't have that plan, but we know that we need to think that through thoroughly and thoughtfully and make sure that we're cognizant of the difference between the blanket G file, here's your representative samples, and all of the other, and that's kind of why we had Cindy come in and give you what does happen in other cities and how many exceptions are there under the Open Records Act instead of just the G file. So we know we need one.
And I just want to, this addresses Ron's question a little bit earlier, but something you said about volume of requests that APD receives and requests that are still pending. The reason APD gets so many is because of what I call corporate requesters like Leftis, Memphis, and other firms firms that compile information, and a lot of what they're requesting are like accident reports and police reports. And so we receive many dozens probably of those each day. And so I would look at those a little bit different than a reporter or a member of the public who's taking the time to write in and actually request a specific officer's file.
And that's where our concern is just, I don't care about the crashes, reports, police, all you want. Get to them when you get to them. Our concern obviously is personal files, because that's discussing in these negotiations. And to Ron's point, that often an officer currently is not notified that their personal information has been requested. What is the process for the officer or for the city should info that should not be released? Because now let's say 143G is gone, and now a lot more information is being evaluated, and information that shouldn't get out gets out. This is personal information about that officer that has a huge impact on them personally, whether it's any of those things that were listed that gets missed in this volume of 25 years or 15 years for my career. What's the process for the officer? As an officer, if I release information to someone that is protected information in our reports, or I run a driver's license return for a buddy because he wants to know about his ex-girlfriend, new boyfriend, like, I would go to jail for that, right? So that is improper release of information. So if the people that are reviewing this release this information improperly, what's the process and recourse for the officer?
I don't know the answer to that. Having done it for a living, I've never had a situation where that arose, thank goodness. Cindy, do you know in non-G-file cities what the statute says about anything about that, or does it speak to it, or is it silent, or do you know?
So yes and no. So the statute speaks to the intentional and willful release of information. It doesn't really speak to, quote, the human error or the accidental error of that. We have seen it happen with some of our other clients. And of the once or twice that it has happened, you submit that request, to that requester and say, you gotta delete that information, return it all to us. We have been lucky so far in that those requesters have complied with that request, but there's no guarantee in it.
Is there, so there may not be a legal remedy, but does the city have policy, or is there going to be what the city's civilian side of internal affairs investigation to say, hey, you missed this on this document, and what's going to happen with the person that missed it?
Right, I don't believe there's a current policy for non-police employees on how to address that. Would there be in the future more police? We haven't drafted any contract to deal with that. It's a concern that hadn't occurred to me, but something to discuss.
I'll make one clarification. I've not, well, just me personally, this use by certain political people and a certain media people, that this whole deal of get rid of the G-file is get rid of secret files. They will not have secret files. All that is required is discipline that was taken without just cause or had insufficient evidence. That's the only category that's in the G that cannot be released. Those two categories. Now, all those, and that's called accepted. All of those things you listed, 552 and every statute list after list after list, are all exceptions to release of public documents. So to say the city will not, and I'm the city will not have secret files, the city has thousands of secret files, including laws that protect the council's personal information. The list of exceptions is enormous. I tried to copy, it's like 100 pages long of exceptions. So we're talking about we're gonna be free and everybody's gonna know. All they're gonna know is whether or not there was a disciplinary allegation that had no just cause and insufficient evidence to make a case. That's all that's in the G file, as far as I know, after the lawsuit. So this is my political statement. Much to do about nothing. We're here, so every time I hear someone say, well, we're getting rid of secret file, no, you're not. Because I could ask for Mayor Watson's home address, phone number, and social security number. You said, well, you can't release that because 552 so-and-so says that's not. Well, that's an exception to public record. So it's a secret file for the mayor. Secret file if I wanted council members' material that's protected in all respects. Those are all exceptions to public record. So, to be clear, that's all that's in the G that I can see in the law. Those two things, involving misconduct, of which there is no evidence that the officer did it, or insufficient, and no just cause and no sufficient. So, let's make it clear, much hoopla, get caught up, they like to throw words around. That's it. That's all that's protected by the G. Okay, so now you have it, but there's going to be another 100 exceptions that the city will have to comply with. And not just say, G just kind of catches it all, but, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we would,
You agree with me?
We would agree that the G file, which is what we are addressing,
Yeah.
includes only what is accepted in the B file, which is any letter, memoranda, or document which the department has found insufficient evidence to sustain an allegation against that officer. That's it. That's
That's
all the G file is.
That's all it
We
is. Everything else is public.
We agree with that.
You get suspended, it's all public.
The,
It's always
yeah,
been
and,
public.
yeah, and the exceptions to the Open Record Act are recognized, within Prop A itself. So.
Yes, but, yeah.
I do not pretend to subscribe to the adjectives within the proposition or not. That's not my place to
I
make.
think it ought to be
statement.
clear, keep going around saying, we're getting rid of the secret file. No, you're not. You're wanting to expose something in which there is no evidence of any guilt or misconduct. So, I understand, but let's be clear. There's hundreds of secret files, of which the public cannot get access, that involve the mayor, every council member, public employee, in some cases, other employees. So, that's my political end of the statement, but I appreciate the presentation, it was
There
very
are
helpful.
files and documents that are considered confidential by law, and those same protections that would be afforded to any civilian within the city would be afforded to the police department.
Correct. Anything else?
Does the police department, when we are reviewing material, do we use any, when we respond to someone or we send a letter to the AG, are we currently using any other exception besides 143.089?
Personnel file?
Someone requests my personnel file. We send anything besides, nope, this is 143.089.
So that's the part that Neil was talking about that's in the A file that goes to HRP. So yes, they still withhold your bank account number, your payroll information. Those are not in the G file.
And those get sent, I'm not just
So
talking.
that's why they're kind of separate.
Someone
So yes.
requests my personnel file, 15 years. When we respond to the AG, or you send a letter to the AG, do you have to claim, hey, this is 552, or this is, and you
Yeah.
send, and so we're already currently
So,
doing it.
yeah, so what we would do is we would say, in our letter to the Attorney General, we would say, we received this request. We have released some of the information, and for the information that we're seeking to withhold, this is our argument. And we have to lay out our argument. And that letter is a public letter. So it goes to the AG, it goes to the requester. And in terms of when we get a request for a personnel file, what would be released would be the stuff that's in the civil service file, HRD. And that would include, as it relates to discipline, if there is formal discipline, so time off, termination, or demotion, there would be a memo in that A file that would be released. And then that would also flag us to background internal affairs investigation related to that memo. And that background investigation material would also be. But we would still have to go through that IA investigation to review it for any other possible exceptions, required redactions, or information that needs to be withheld.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we may have a little bit more for you today, so we can take a break, with the 11:38. You want to say maybe 1 o'clock? One or 1:30, let us text you for sure, but 1 or 1:30 ish.
That'd be great.